In fact, right now there are more soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan combined than were deployed to those two countries during the height of the Iraq surge. America's soldiers continue to excel on the battlefield, doing extraordinary things under incredible pressure. As we look to the future, it is the great innovation and shifts in the Army these last few years, institutionally and operationally, that must guide the service going forward. What have we learned in the last few years, and how is it relevant to potential conflicts of tomorrow? The challenge I posed to the Army 2 years ago was to retain the lessons learned and capabilities gained in counterinsurgency and irregular warfare. From all I've seen, heard, and witnessed, that certainly has taken place. In fact, today's Army bears but a passing resemblance to that of 8 years ago, a force mostly designed to repeat another Desert Storm. The Army we have is a supremely adaptable and flexible force, able to deploy rapidly, operate with more autonomy, and slide along the scale of conflict spectrum to confront very different types of threats. Let me give a few examples. First of all, on the technological side, there have been tremendous advances in our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. Advances that have led to an unprecedented fusion of intelligence and operations on the ground. Other communications improvements have led to much greater command and control, and more tools to improve this further are getting out to the field. The Army has recognized that the most important part of its procurement strategy is the network, as opposed to the platform. In coming years, there should be revolutionary breakthroughs in the ability of our troops to see themselves, other allied forces, and their adversaries, even if the inevitable fog of war and resourceful enemies prevent us from ever achieving total situational awareness. There have also been entirely new concepts from the war zones. One of the most important is the Advise and Assist Brigade, the AAB, that has three main functions: traditional strike capabilities, advisory roles, and the enablers and command and control to support both functions. In July, I visited the first AAB deployed to Iraq, and I was impressed with the ability to retool a standard brigade combat team in only a few months and with relatively small force augmentation. By the end of next year, we plan for the Iraq mission to be composed almost entirely of AABs, and the expectation is that sometime down the road, the same will be true in Afghanistan. There is, unfortunately, still a lingering view that advisory positions are second-tier jobs, an assumption that needs to be addressed through assignments and promotions. The advisory, train, and equip mission is a key role for the Army going forward, given that America's security will increasingly depend on our ability to build the capabilities of other nations. These capabilities are all the more necessary considering the steep human, political, and financial costs of direct U.S. military intervention. Under the leadership of General Dempsey, the Army also has put its training and doctrine process on a war footing. At the Combined Arms Center, the doctrinal cycle has been reduced dramatically. For example, the AAB doctrine was developed and fielded in only a couple of months, proof that the Army has accelerated its ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. This is a key advantage, not just in counterinsurgency, but in any kind of conflict, where the 75% solution fielded in months is often far better than a 99% solution that might take years. We cannot allow the Army's ability to swiftly adapt at the institutional level to become ossified down the line. Perhaps the greatest change, however, is on the ground level with the men and women on the front lines. Young officers and NCOs at the front have always had to make profound life and death decisions. But in today's conflicts, their responsibilities are even greater and more complex, playing the roles of warrior, diplomat, mayor, economist, city engineer, and tribal liaison, all often at the same time. We must ensure that that kind of mental agility, entrepreneurial spirit, and independent judgment required to be effective downrange carries over into future assignments. It's a safe bet that the leader who thrives in an environment of this complexity can adapt quickly to other missions and other forms of war. But looking forward, we must find a way to retain seasoned young officers and NCOs and give them the opportunities to use these same talents when they move on from combat positions of momentous responsibility to more mundane assignments in the bureaucracy. Their battlefield experience must form the core of an Army prepared to fight wars in the future. That brings me to a larger point. For the last few years, there's been a concern that our force is too focused on counterinsurgency and has lost its edge for complex, conventional operations involving multiple brigades or divisions. The experiences of the British colonial army before World War I and the Israeli military in Lebanon have even been cited. This is a legitimate concern, and we continue to work toward finding the right balance. But the notion that the changes we have seen amount to turning the Army into some sort of counterinsurgency constabulary that is losing its core competencies, above all to shoot, move, and communicate, does not reflect the realities of the current campaigns. Take, for example, the Battle of Sadr City last year. In that campaign, U.S. troops had to synchronize air power, artillery, and ISR, all while maneuvering through an incredibly complex urban environment and coordinating with numerous dispersed units. And let there be no doubt that modernization plans for the full spectrum of warfare continue. The Army is accelerating the development of the Warfighter Information Network and will field it and proven FCS spin-offs across the entire force. I remain committed to the Army's ground vehicle modernization program, but it has to be done in a way that reflects the lessons we've learned in the last few years about war in the 21st century, and that incorporates the Department of Defense's nearly $30 billion investment in MRAPs. We have to recognize that the black and white distinction between conventional war and irregular war is an outdated model. Simply possessing the ability to annihilate other militaries in a conventional fight in no way ensures that we can achieve our strategic goals, a point driven home in both Iraq and Afghanistan. In reality, the future will be more complex, where all conflict will range across a broad spectrum of operations and lethality, where even near-peer competitors will use irregular or asymmetric tactics, and non-state actors may have weapons of mass destruction or sophisticated missiles. Even as we prepare for the future and pursue modernization plans, we must always recognize the limits of technology and be modest about what military force alone can accomplish. Advances in precision, sensor information, and satellite technologies have led to extraordinary gains that will continue to give the U.S. military an edge over its adversaries. But no one should ever neglect the psychological, cultural, political, and human dimensions of war, or succumb to the techno-optimism that has muddled strategic thinking in the past. And that is especially true for the ground services, which will be in the lead for and bear the brunt of irregular and hybrid campaigns in the future. Let me close with a final thought. For 8 years now, the Army has been in a constant state of war. Our soldiers have been deployed over and over again and taken the fight to increasingly battle-hardened and lethal enemies. The stakes have been enormous, the tales of heroism and sacrifice extraordinary. Hundreds of thousands of brave warriors have volunteered to serve their country knowing they probably would go to war. They have endured time away from family and friends, and they have risked their lives for their fellow soldiers. There is no way to overstate the challenges facing our Army, but when I think about the individual soldiers, their honor, and their courage, I am confident that the United States Army will continue to meet those challenges and, as always, exceed every expectation in the years ahead. Thank you.